Okay, so today we're going to talk about what we see as some of the essential ingredients in creating a great onboarding journey. We're going to draw upon our years of experience in this space and talking to lots of different organisations about what they're doing. Also, what some of the sort of top hiring companies in the world are doing as well around onboarding and the different sort of time zones of onboarding, what you can do. What I'm showing is I just want to take a moment just to talk about the employee onboarding journey and the main components to that. And everyone's probably familiar with what I'm showing on the screen, those major milestones, which is usually a verbal offer that you send out. You've done the recruitment, you're selecting the candidate, you make them a verbal offer. After that, you then obviously send a formal offer to formalise that. They accept that offer, they show up on first day, the first week kind of comes and goes. And then, the end of onboarding is usually the first anniversary or end of probation, depending on your organisation and how you see that onboarding going out to. I guess what some of the problems we see with a lot of organisations and where onboarding typical fails is in a couple of different time zones. One of them is around once the candidate formally accepts their offer and before that first day, that there's really limited contact with that new starter. And in Australia, for a lot of, say, white-collar jobs, you've kind of got a 4-week notice period with your prior employer. And usually that's a time where nothing really happens with the organisation you're starting with. And we'll drill down on that a little bit in this webinar. Between that first day and first week, again, there's a lot, sometimes, a lot of organisations really emphasise the first day, but it kind of dribbles off after that. And there's not enough immersion into the business in that first week. And then ongoing, really, that's the period where you need to have those continual check-ins and that alignment fit with your culture. And we see there's not enough probation check-ins. So in an ideal world, what we want to see is some differences in that. First of all, we want to see candidate acceptance happen really soon after the formal offer is sent. And obviously moving to an onboarding platform allows you to do that a lot easier because you're not sending things through the post or it's not very manual. So you can get that candidate acceptance really quick. But once they've accepted, what you want to do before their first day is engage early and often. We'll go through this webinar. We're going to go through these major milestones and talk about what you can do in each of these. But really, it's about engaging early and often in those in that pre-day one period. Once in their first week, taking them a deep dive into the business across a different couple of categories, and I'll introduce you into a kind of formula or a philosophy we have about how the elements you need to think about in terms of the category of activities when you're building out an onboarding program. And then after that first week, up until that first anniversary, it's really those continual check-ins. And we'll show you some examples about companies that are doing this really well. So let's talk about employee onboarding. So we've got a cute dog picture. You can't do a webinar without a cute dog picture. Look, we've spoken to literally hundreds of companies about their onboarding and studying some of the leading companies that have the resources to do onboarding really well. And we've kind of come up with 4 categories that we think is a really great way to structure an onboarding program. And we've tied it up into a nice little mnemonic called COAT. So COAT stands for, the first part of COAT, the C is about culture. And this is about how do we put our company's values, vision, and culture forward. Not only the company's values and vision and culture, but also the team they're joining. So when you're building the ingredients for an onboarding program, how do you really think about those cultural elements and how they are intermixed through those main hiring periods or onboarding periods? The next element in our COAT is objectives. And this is really ensuring that the new starter understands what the organization is trying to achieve. And you know, you find so many people now join organizations based on the vision, the values, and you know, how they're trying to change the world. So it's really essential that the new starter understands the company's objectives and where they're trying to go to, but also the objectives of their position. You know, if you bring it back down to what's in it for the new starter, they want to understand the objectives of their position in the org, what their role is, and what their career progression looks like. So it's really important throughout the latter stages of onboarding that you focus about their objectives, their career goals, and objectives. The next part of our COAT acronym is about administrative, and you can't get away from the admin side of onboarding. There's so many sort of elemental pieces to onboarding that you need to get right, which really affects that onboarding experience overall. And you know, whether that's administrative from the offer management, whether that's provisioning, whether in IT or payroll provisioning, or it's compliant tasks and online courses they need to perform. You can't forget about those elements. Sometimes we see, you know, a lot of organizations really just concentrate on the admin side and forget some of these cultural objectives and other elements that you need to include. The last element is something I really like, and it's about team. So this is, again, when you're building onboarding programs, understanding how the team fits into an onboarding experience. And, you know, the questions here is, how do we integrate the new starter into the team and the people they'll be working with? And look, there's a lot of studies that show, you know, decentralized onboarding, if it's done well, really has a major impact on time to productivity and retention for new starters, because that team and cultural onboarding that happens to that functional area or that little group that new starter is starting with really plays a big part in it. But it's for HR, it's a really difficult one to manage and to have an oversight of what's going on in those areas. So as we go through this webinar, we're going to think about that COAT acronym and how it plays out, how these categories play out through the main stages of onboarding. So let's talk about before the first day, and we touched on a little bit how, you know, before the first day, they've accepted their offer and they're waiting to start, that it's both a danger and opportunity time for new hires. In some industries, you can have a lot of dropout in this stage. We've seen certainly in the travel industry, where there's a high demand for young people as travel operators, I think you'd call them, where they'll get offered other jobs during that time and they'll renege and they actually won't show up on day one. So there's a lot of, again, it's a danger and opportunity time, but I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in terms of the opportunity to really enhance your onboarding experience by focusing on this stage. So if we break the before day one into our sort of COAT categories, you can see here's a sample of tasks and actions to look at. And you'll notice as we go through these major sort of milestones of onboarding that some areas like before day one can be very admin focused, and that's for a purpose, right? Because you need to get the basics right in terms of getting the offer out, making sure that information's got to payroll so they'll actually get paid. You know, IT systems and physical provisioning is really important. So they've got access cards, they can got their swipe card before day one, they can actually get onto the network when they join, those sort of things. But also there's another big area here is about culture. And I think it's really important when you look at that onboarding before day one to make sure you're continuing the story and messaging that you've done in recruitment. There's been a lot of work done in the talent acquisition space about employer value proposition and making sure, you know, you're sending that message out to your talent pool about what your company stands for. It's really important that you continue reinforcing that culture and your unique style to your new starters in that time. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Here we've just suggested some ways. You know, a CEO welcome via video is great so that they have that personal video. Getting those new starters to join up with some of your social media profiles, whether that's Facebook or LinkedIn, and even going to the extent of gifts for new starters. So sending out a gift to that new starter that aligns with your culture. I think in the last webinar, we talked about what Atlassian do pre-day one, where they actually send their new starters on a holiday. Not everyone can do that, but there's always something you can do that's unique to you. In terms of the team, I think how you think about getting involved, getting team members involved will vary org to org. But I think ensuring at least the team leader and someone who's not the team leader but is in that team, getting them known and introduced beforehand should be kind of table stakes as part of your onboarding program. Building relationships and introducing new hires early to the team is really important. You don't have to try and boil the ocean here, but just, you know, even if it's just the 4 or 5 closest people they're working with is better than nothing. What's worked really well for us here at HROnboard when we bring new starters into our organization is inviting them to our Slack channel, which is our online messaging platform. And basically, we invite them to, you know, log into our Slack channel, and that's where they can hear all the company chatter amongst different teams. We're not really worrying about them actively contributing, but they can get to know who's who in the organisation and to see what types of conversations do go on. And it's a nice way to kind of gently immerse them into our team. Some of the companies that do this really well, a couple of examples here. Twitter's got a one, and just in terms of making sure everything's ready for their new starters on day one, they have this yes to desk type policy to make sure you know, everything is worked out to a T for those new starters to start. And you know, provisioning is such a complex area for a lot of organisations. There's a lot of moving parts in onboarding, and we know this well in terms of you know, the amount of different departments that need some sort of snapshot of data about that new starter to provision them and make sure it's ready is really important. And Twitter is a good example of you know, they really concentrate on that because they know the effect of that has on new starters on day one. Another great example that I've had personally relayed to me by one of our advisors is about Hard Rock Cafe. They were opening a new store in a major city. You know, obviously they've got to recruit hundreds of people for a new store that they're building. They actually set up like a Facebook group for anyone who started or anyone who they hired and was going to start. What they found was really interesting. By the time the store opened and you know, people actually started on their first day, these new starters had already built a really strong community of workers by themselves in that Facebook group, to the extent that so many of them already knew who they were before they rocked up on day one. And also some had even started to share houses and accommodation because they weren't from that area. So it was really amazing the communities you can build in that time before day one. And I think if you're doing a lot of bulk recruitment or graduate recruitment, there's plenty of opportunities to create those communities. So what I want to do, I just want to pause here and bring up a little poll and see what people are doing before one in your organisation. So I'm going to just launch this poll here. So if everyone can just have a look at what level of communication are you doing with your new hires before day one? The choices are none at all, it's radio silence, basic comms to make sure they show up, we keep in touch fairly often, and the last one is we love them to death before they arrive. So I'll just let the poll run for a couple of seconds while we're doing that, and then I can show the results. So we've got a good crowd today, so hopefully we'll get some good numbers, and you know, you can get to see whether this reflects on what we see. So I'll just run it for a little bit longer. So we've got some things. Hopefully you should be able to see that on your screen. We've got a couple of people just, I think, might be asking. If you've got a question, you can just type that into the question box as well. You can raise your hand and we can talk to you by chat. I might just publish that result now on the end poll. Just close off that poll and share the results. Can you see those results? Yep. Okay, so pretty much a big portion of you is at basic comms to make sure they show up. And look, that's not unusual. That a lot of organisations just do those basic things. It's nice to see though 20% actually keep in touch fairly often as well, so that's really good. And at least one of you loves them to death before they arrive. Well done, whoever that is. Awesome work. Okay, so that was just a little experiment just to see what's going on with our audience and how that reflects. So you've nailed pre-day one. So now let's take a look at what that first week and first day looks like as well. And again, looking through our coat lens, you know, here's a kind of a grab bag of activities and where the focus needs to be on that first day and first week. Looking back at the first day, look, the first day is such a big event from any new starter, and you know, we've gone through a big growth spurt here at HROnboard, and that seeing what happens on the first day and the mindset of person, it's everyone says it's overwhelming when you start a new job. I got one of the sales guys in here with me in the webinar, and he's nodding his head. You know, you're meeting lots of people, you've been in a new environment, and I think the lesson is not to overwhelm people with too much content, because look, the reality is they're not going to retain most of it. I think it's important to give them schedules to know what to expect for their first day. We'd always recommend assigning a peer buddy who can kind of show the new hire the ropes. Someone who's not their boss is sometimes a good idea as well, so they can answer the mundane but important questions about office culture, quirks of the team, and you know, just those real orientation questions that is never going to show up. HR have no control of being able to you know, document what happens in a satellite office of a 3,000 employee company. You know, you know, those basic things, and this is where a buddy is a great person to have. Someone to take them out to lunch, introduce the person, and do the tour of the office. So there's a little bit of admin, there's that team welcome. The other bit is the cultural welcome too, and this is kind of the culture and objectives, and it's really about immersing new hires into your business. So it's really important to take the time to convey what makes your company unique, and conveying that over that first week. Also, because the new hire is starting in a particular department or function, it's really important to start drilling down from a company point of view down into that functional area of the business that they're joining, and starting to understand that there's kind of the subculture within the company around that area, what the objectives are, you know, what you're trying to achieve with that. The relationship part that spans both culture and team is about introducing new starters to the extended team. So building lasting relationships is really key for retention. So getting the new hire to meet as many people as possible in their direct orbit. I think it's great if you can get those new starters also meeting with key executives, senior leaders, and even the CEO, just to reinforce the company vision and objectives as well. Again, there's some great examples about companies that do this really well. Airbnb do a lot of different things. One of those is, again, they create these groups that stay with, you know, they create these groups during the onboarding process, and they're cross-functional groups of new starters, and they encourage those groups to kind of keep going post the onboarding stage. And part of this is getting cross-functional teams talking. And I think, you know, we've seen this in our own business and in other businesses, to create that empathy about other parts of the business is really important. such that, someone in a back office support role really understands someone on the front line and what they do, and vice versa, is really great for the business. And certainly when I go out there, I see a major focus on onboarding programs to understand, sometimes you'd call it the operational or the money-making part of the business, and creating that empathy for people who aren't in those frontline positions. Twitter does this. They actually do a good thing about scheduled happy hours, again, for new starters to meet with the senior team in cross-functional talks. And I know sometimes we kind of get criticised a bit for showing, the big tech companies and what they're doing. And I think, but when you look at what they're doing, sometimes it's not that complex. It's not that expensive to implement. It's just that they've kind of had the headspace to think about these things and understand what works. And again, a lot of these companies are very data driven, so they try and back this up with some empirical evidence about that this really has an impact on the company. Facebook has an interesting one, which is about a 45-minute rule of time to productivity. So they try and get some of their engineers, in there and coding in the first 45 minutes, which is pretty extreme. But again, it's trying to get their alignment with what's important to them. So if we go past the first week and we go into that first anniversary stage, and this is really interesting because a lot of what we see is the onboarding really starts to lose, the onboarding program loses steam and puff post the first day and first week, because by the first week that person's kind of they're in the company, they understand what they need to be doing, and this is where we see a lot of where it becomes harder for HR to keep an eye and oversight on what's going on in this space and how the team leaders are doing things. But this is also the danger zone, because again, there's a lot of evidence to point out that without some sort of structured onboarding program post that first week, you'll lose a lot of people in the first 3, 6, 12 months because they're kind of, there's not enough check-ins. So again, if we look through our coat lens and see what's important here, often what we find, it's as I said, it's easy to lose your focus on those new starters there, and that might be fine in some businesses. And again, everything we're showing here is not prescriptive. Every business is unique. If you're in a retail operation, you've got a lot of casuals with high turnovers, your onboarding might last for a week, and that's fine, because they're in there selling shoes. They've done it for the first week. They kind of get it. It's a casual job. You're going to expect some churn. But in other industries, the cost of replacing employees is a lot higher. So it's really critical to enable an easy flow of feedback with your new starter and the team leader throughout that probation, and really establishing the regular catch-ups, whether that's fortnightly, monthly probation chats, is really important. Getting that feedback through things like onboarding surveys, where you tap into people, and sometimes it's really good to get those outsiders' view about what's going on, and their fresh ideas, to get that filtering through, which is a different perspective than people who've been in the business for a long time. The regular touch points really uncover any early warning signs and identify new starters that might need some help. As part of that, and I'll drill down on that in a second, but the other part is about development and career objectives. One of the emerging categories we see in the HR tech space is around career pathing, and really, mapping out for employees what their personal, professional development looks like and where they can go. And we talk about this in the business a lot as well. We talk about that in our business also around where they will go post our business if we can't accommodate their long-term goals, but knowing that's where they want to go. And I think as employers, it's really important that you accept that everyone's not going to stay with your business forever, but you want them to leave a better person than what they came into your business as. So, you know, I think if you care about employees enough to map out where they really want to go in their future, obviously that's going to create great relationships with their team leaders and encourage them to stick around and progress and learn in your business. One of the, I guess what I want to drill down on here a little bit is about those probation reviews. What we found, again, talking to a whole bunch of organisations, is that lack of discipline, I guess, in managing the probation process. And I think one of the unexpected side effects of a great onboarding process is weeding out the people that you don't want in your business. And I think that's not a bad attitude to have as well. I was at a conference on Monday where the author of Freakonomics, Stephen Levitt, was speaking, and he was talking about the power of quitting and knowing when you should leave things and when it's not right for you. There's power in that, right? Because you're not doing the right thing. And saying that, organizations should employ a lot more people in apprenticeships and probations to encourage that tribe, but exit people just as fast if they're not fitting. And I think not a lot of organizations think in that light, but I think particularly in organizations where you're really looking for that alignment, you should consider that. We talked a little bit about Facebook, but one of the guys who's famous for this is Zappos. And what they do, they actually offer people, their new hires in the probation period, $2,000 if they quit. So they've done this for a long, long time. And they make this offer to all their new employees saying, hey, look, guys, we know we're not for everyone. And if you're not for us, that's fine. We're going to give you $2,000 if you decide to leave. And some people do take it up. It's not huge amounts, but it's really making sure that you're getting the right people in the business. And I think in today's climate where businesses need more intellectual power than anything else, that's really key. So just to wrap up, I guess in terms of showing the bottom line of amazing onboarding experiences, we've taken you through some of the sort of the lens of what you need to think about when you're creating an onboarding program across those 3 big milestones. But really, the bottom line of onboarding is trying to reduce that cost per hire, and you can do that by digitizing a lot of the manual heavy lifting. You want to increase new hire productivity. You want to get them into the business working as soon as possible. And the third one is increasing that new hire retention. You want people to stick around, the right people to stick around. And then I'd argue the fourth is ensuring you've got the right people in that business. By managing that probation period strongly, you can really ensure you've got the right people in the business. So I think, what I leave you with today is looking at that onboarding experience through that COAT acronym, the culture, objectives, administration, and team. And I think if you build your onboarding program through that lens, it'll create a much richer and rewarding experience for new hires, which results in happier, more productive, and better fit employees for your organization. So thanks for listening today. We'll take a few questions. If anyone's got any questions or anything they want to dig down on, happy to oblige.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Peter. We have just enough time to go through 1 or 2 questions. The first question we have here, someone says they come from a large organization where there's many different types of employees, so from white collar office workers to development to blue collar field workers. So in this scenario, designing a one-size-fits-all onboarding program is not feasible. How have you seen organizations with many different types of employee create good onboarding programs?
Yeah, look, that's a bit of a challenge, right? Because if you're if you're a 3,000 employee business and you've got so many different job types in your organization, from blue collar to white collar, back office, all sorts. And there is a lot of companies like that. It's really hard for HR to kind of build a one-size-fits-all program. I think the best way is to focus on the global aspects around your culture and your brand that everyone needs to understand and get. What we see more and more, and the studies tend to back it up, is that decentralizing the onboarding process is really critical, because it's about, and again, we've covered this in a previous webinar about the 5 pillars of onboarding. One of them is that personalization down at that level, to really personalize the experience to the job role or the functional area. So I think if you can decentralize that, getting your functional leaders to really think about what they need to put in that program, and giving them empowering them to look after that, that's really good. Part of the challenge, though, we see is getting department heads and team leaders understanding the value in that onboarding experience.
Great. And we just have one final question here from Fiona. She has similar issues with big businesses, but she's in a small business with under 100 employees. And she struggles with people manager engagement and the importance of it. Any advice?
That, and it's amazing. We used to say team leaders are time poor and they don't care about the onboarding experience. And it's not, and maybe that's a bit too harsh that they don't care. It's they don't see the value in it. And this has come out in a few conversations I've had recently. Someone said to me, they just don't see the value in why we need to, do things before they start. And so I think, it's not a simple solution. I mean, definitely in our products, we're trying to build the value for the team leader, such they getting them to do really, really simple things that are really quick to do, that have a high value. I think it's about, bringing the stories back to your organization and looking at the people you're retaining and not retaining in the business. I mean, the simplest example of this is just probation reviews. If team leaders should have some basic concepts around Fair Work Australia, and if you haven't got the right person in your team about, the mechanisms to remove that, basically in Australian law, you've got 6 months to remove someone who's not a good fit without any comeback on the employer. But the value the difficulty in removing someone after that 6 months probation, is huge. So it's showing that value of what a good hire versus a bad hire looks like and does for them in the team. And I think when you're talking about people personally, I think of that old acronym, which is WEFM, which stands what's in it for me. You can tell I like acronyms here. But it's really what's in it for me. So for the team leader, it's what you need to phrase it. What's in it for me if I do a great onboarding experience for a new starter? And if you can I think that answer is going to be unique for every business. But if you can, go from their perspective and you can nail that, you'll get better contribution from them.
Great. Well, that's all the questions for today. Thanks everyone for joining us. If you'd like any further information, there's plenty of content on the website which tackles topics ranging from employee onboarding or to the engagement side. If you'd like to book an obligation-free session with one of our onboarding specialists, you can discuss anything we covered today in a little bit more depth. We will also be sending out a recording of today's webinar to go over anything you may have missed. So keep an eye out on your email inboxes. And that's it for today. Thanks again, everyone, for joining in, and have a great afternoon.
Okay, thanks, everyone. See ya.